It is 9 a.m. on the dot, Wednesday, November 10th, 2010. This meeting of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority Board is now in session. Mr. Tejas, any public comments?
Yes, sir. We have one individual signed up for public comment by the name of Raul Pena.
Mr. Pena?
I wasn't signed up to actually make a comment. I was just signed up to attend.
All right. Thank you.
We were excited, Mr. Pena. You were going to be our first public comment in a while, so, thank you, Mr. Pena. I appreciate you attending today. The adoption of the minutes, item 3 for the CRRMA meeting of October 13th, 2010. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes? Are there any comments, changes, additions?
Prior to the action, I'd make a comment. 2 minor revisions that I caught over this last day or so. I added page numbers and also corrected the name of the Vice President of First Southwest Company who gave us a presentation on item number 4. His last name was misspelled. Other than that, as presented.
Mr. Tejas, thank you. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Minutes are approved. Item 4, presentation on the Regional Ports of Entry Operations Plan by the Texas Department of Transportation and project consultants. And I think that is all one person today. Mr. Mark Tomlinson from Texas Turnpike Authority. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. And I think I have a PowerPoint coming up. Hopefully you have handouts there. And I'm not sure how to get this going. Let's see. Anything? I don't know if there's somebody to operate this or not. Here, some help. Okay. Just click or use the arrow. Okay. Thanks very much. Sorry for the pause. My name is Mark Tomlinson, and I work for the Texas Department of Transportation here today in a role as project manager for the El Paso Regional Port of Entry Plan. And we've been working on this plan for a number of months now. I really saw the scope initially back around January, February time frame, and we have been working ever since then on the initial stages of the plan and study, and would like to just briefly outline that for you, give you an update of the progress so far, schedule of how we'll proceed to hopefully conclusion around the first quarter of the coming year. So the agenda you can see, and briefly talk about it, the project approach, and really this is just meant to be a fairly informal status of the work. Our basic scope is to review all of the existing ports of entry within a region that spans from Santa Teresa, New Mexico, down to Tornillo. And the key focus of the plan is to analyze how the current ports of entry operate and try to make recommendations to improve the efficiency and operation of those ports. We're often asked if this is a study to locate a new port of entry, and it is not that directly, although some of the information we will generate should give local leadership information to use if they choose to in making that decision in the future. So focus again would be to analyze and for each of the existing ports of entry, we're building traffic models that will show how they operate today under current traffic conditions and how they'll operate in the future under population growth, traffic growth demand that you see, and how they'll operate if nothing has changed about their operation, and then how they might operate if some recommendations of the study are implemented. We will ultimately develop short-term, mid-term, and long-term recommendations. Some of the initial ideas and direction in our scope clearly would most likely fit into each of those categories. Some things might be implemented pretty easily by local officials. Some are very much longer term and could be very complex to implement due to the number of entities and involved and some of the other factors. A key, I guess, guiding principle of the study has been that we don't want to develop a wish list of projects that are hugely expensive and can never be implemented. We have tried to focus on things that can be implemented, and so we'll lean toward things that really are more in the control of local governments and things that you can do with hopefully little coordination and cooperation to improve the ports. But we will ultimately have a detailed plan about how you could make improvements to all the existing ports. We'll also include funding and financing strategies for those recommendations and outline who would be involved if you choose any of those suggested strategies. We were fortunate to be blessed with a really good set of advisory committee members. This group has served in an advisory role since the very first day of the study. Of course, Scott McLaughlin is a member of that committee. Walter Miller, who is, of course, mayor of the city of Horizon City, and also serves on the MPO board. Steve Ortega, city council representative for the city of El Paso. We assembled a consultant team, and these consultants were actually on contract with TxDOT at the time of the study beginning. So I think that's part of the reason for us being involved. We could mobilize the consultants quickly and get them to work. Cambridge Systematics is our lead consultant, and Jim Brogan is our project manager. Most likely we'll probably have another briefing for you, or at least we'll offer that to you at the conclusion or near the conclusion of the study when we are to the point of making potential preliminary recommendations. So Cambridge has been our lead, Jim in particular doing a great job, I think. University of Texas El Paso is playing a key role, professors and graduate students helping with system inventory, also some economic modeling and other data gathering. HNDB local office, and in fact an El Paso native. Yes, sir.
What is system inventory?
Just looking at the existing infrastructure, the roadways and rail systems that you have, that just essentially trying to
Port of entry.
Well, and beyond that, really, the roadway system that feeds into that and connects between ports. We're trying to look at each individual port of entry, but also how they may interact together. So there's roadways that connect those, and trying to look at them as a system as well. So HNTB, in fact, an El Paso native, Allison Pasternak, is leading HNTB's effort. They're an engineering company, and they're working in a variety of different roles, but helping with public involvement as well. There's a pretty significant financial aspect to the study as well. KPMG is under contract with TxDOT, and they'll be doing the valuation of the transportation system. We've been asked to estimate the economic value to the region of the ports of entry, that the POEs create, what they bring to the region, and also the question's been asked: if the port of entries, either individually or as a system, were privatized, what kind of concession value could the region expect if you chose that direction? So KPMG is working on those aspects. And I would also like to note that Yolanda Henier, local attorney, has been working with us, leading really our public involvement, which for this project has been extensive and really unprecedented in my experience. We've tried to go above and beyond the minimum level of effort to reach out to as many people in the region as we could. So a phased approach in how we're approaching the plan. Public involvement really being the large effort that we initiated around the February-March timeframe. And I would note that there was a large effort in the first phase of public involvement, and we'll circle back and repeat some of that in the latter phase, which comes in December, January. But we started with a Harris Interactive poll. They polled 1,000 participants, both on the Mexico side and the U.S. side, asking about use of the ports of entry, their attitudes and thoughts about the ports of entry. We then progressed to stakeholder meetings with truckers and shippers, the business community, chambers of commerce, different groups that had opinions about the ports, and then broadened into a total, I believe, of 6 public meetings in which we asked the same types of questions of the public and gathered ultimately about 160 concepts or recommendations or thoughts, projects that those groups, everybody involved, thought would be good to implement. And we since have gone through a process of screening those down, combining where logical, where necessary.
Can I ask you?
Yes, sir.
I think I went to one of those meetings, and only about 4 or 5 people went. Can I ask you what the attendance has been in those meetings?
But from a range of around that level, some of the stakeholder meetings were fairly lightly attended. Some we had a pretty large attendance. Some of the public meetings were relatively lightly attended, especially in the outlying areas that further from the center of El Paso. But I think we had as high, I know when I attended, around 200 people at that. So it kind of varied, and don't know what the average attendance would be, but it would just kind of depended on where you were, and tended to be larger near the central part of El Paso.
I can tell you, Dr. Payan, that I believe a really good effort has been made to go out and get the word out, to encourage people to attend, and so there's been a lot of effort to make sure the information's out there in the media, on the website, in a lot of areas, to let people know about these meetings if they're interested to come participate.
Right. We did, again, above the minimum of just posting a public notice or putting a little ad in the newspaper. We did media interviews, both print and television interviews, radio interviews, scoured the countryside to try to get people out. It's always a challenge, I'll tell you. People, it's sometimes hard to get their attention given all the many other things that distract people. So I kind of talked about the first part, stakeholder outreach, that really continues today. We've had a series of meetings last week and this week with different groups and different individuals. We did a briefing for the El Paso City Council yesterday, also briefed Horizon City Council last night, and continue with really anybody that we still have a few parties, particularly from the Mexico side, that we're still reaching out to. We've talked to a significant number of people and people representing entities over there, but we still do have some work to do there. But we are to the point of that project screening that I mentioned, and scenario development, probably 4 to 5 scenarios that we'll test through the traffic models that will be generated. So we're honing those now. They're not finalized, but we're getting fairly close. Should be that throughout the remainder of November and probably at our December advisory committee meeting, we'll try to boil those down to the 4 or 5 that we'll actually test. And then we'll run those tests, and they'll show how hopefully improvements can be made in the short term to the ports of entry, and then potential long-term recommendations as well. After we get what ends up being the potential list of recommendations, we'll go back out for stakeholder meetings and another series of public meetings to get their reaction on those proposed recommendations before they're finalized.
Can I ask you a question about this scenario development? The U.S.-Mexico border is on every border. There's there's traffic going in 4 different ways. In and out, and then out and in. You know what I mean? Sure. On this border, so far, the only true checkpoint was entering the United States, not exiting the United States, not entering Mexico, and not exiting Mexico. The intention of the United States now is to check the traffic going out of the country as well, and it's already kind of a makeshift randomized check going into Mexico. Trucks, cars are being pulled over to the side. Obviously, the system looks improvised, but the intention is to make it permanent and eventually to create the infrastructure and you will not be able to exit the United States without getting checked, much like the way you get checked when you come in. Is that being contemplated?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we have understood from Customs and Border Protection.
Yeah.
And so that is what we will model. They've told us it's their intention from now on to do that. So of course we'll have that modeled. We've also met with aduanas, the counterpart over in Mexico, to understand some of their operations to the extent that they can tell us, and also changes that they plan to make. And I think there are some changes that they're planning in the fairly short term in a couple of the crossings. So, as closely as we can glean from all of the parties who operate on the border, we'll try to have their most up-to-date information plugged into the models.
When the traffic gets really backed up, because I go to Juarez about 3 or 4 times a week, it can pretty much on the Free Bridge, for example, the Cordova Bridge, it can pretty much go all the way back and up the top layer of the spaghetti bowl and back down on I-10 almost to Geronimo. It can back down all the way down there.
Right.
So we're not equipped to do that, and so I'd like to make sure that we think about whether we have that infrastructure to do the checking as you exit the United States. And it's going to be quite complicated, and we're moving in that direction anyway.
Yeah. Well, and to that point directly, you can imagine then, if nothing changes, how that is going to affect your interstate and your transportation network in the next 10, 20, 30 years. It's going to be an even more serious problem. And also to that end, one of the parts of our scope that may most likely will be somewhat controversial, but they did ask us, since the Bridge of the Americas is the only non-tolled bridge in the system in the region, to try to answer the question, what if it were tolled? And what if if the tolling regime were dynamically changing throughout the day, to try to manage that congestion better, to incentivize traffic to move to other ports. And I can tell you the reaction we've received thus far. Some people think it's a good idea and we should investigate it. Typically, trucking firms, Maquias, are very much against that. But nonetheless, it's part of our scope, and we will analyze that question and give the results to local leadership. So, been working very hard to understand regional issues by talking to a lot of people and people representing entities, and kind of follow the process that I mentioned previously. Okay, I've kind of talked already about the first phase of public meetings, so I'll skip through that. Just kind of some of the high-level things that we've heard so far. Just about everyone we talked to recognized the importance of the border crossings and realize that they have a huge economic impact. There's also a negative impact that people see: border wait times, congestion issues, or quality issues. And there's the emerging concern that those things, if not addressed, will begin to erode the competitiveness of this area in terms of the economy and industry in the region. Typically, we've heard the thought of trying to make your existing infrastructure work better rather than focusing on building new infrastructure is one that really resounds in the community. I think they think that makes sense, and they understand that, of course, any new port of entry would be very expensive to build, would take a long time to implement. So trying to make the most of what you have is something that we've heard a lot of positive feedback from in the community. But they also note that often it's limited staffing at the ports, it's a lack of technology, an inefficient process at just about every port of entry that we've heard is really probably the overriding issue that needs to be addressed.
Mark, I think one of the goals too is as we look through all the bridges and as you look through the various solutions that are available and implemented, I believe the study is going to show if at a certain point down the road, doing everything if the infrastructure is not going to be capable to meet the demand. Is that correct?
Right. We should be able to tell you that and hopefully estimate the timing of that breakdown of the system if it occurs. We've said throughout the study that we don't assume that a new bridge is needed, but we don't rule one out either. hopefully the data and the objective application of the data will show if you're going to need a new crossing sometime in the future and approximately when you could expect that it would be needed. And I think that's extremely important information for the region, because then you know that you know the situation. You can make hopefully better, more informed decisions about your future then. Kind of talked about the process. We had over 150, about 160 projects, thoughts, strategies that we're grouping into hopefully logical projects or scenarios that we will then evaluate around the December, January timeframe. We hope in January to have our list of preliminary recommendations. We have gone through, unfortunately, a little longer process than we had hoped, gathering data from Customs and Border Patrol. They've been very cooperative. It's just been a slow process to get the data that we needed, and in fact have not gotten all that we would need. So we're going to have to come back, spend a little more time, a little more manpower to gather some of the transactional data, some of the inspection time, and just get a good feel for what and how that is and how it operates and how it changes throughout the day. Again, I mentioned the pricing, the concept of tolling the Bridge of the Americas. Again, not assuming that will be done or could be done easily, but hopefully answering the question of what if you did it. And I think you'll see a lot of technology and ITS type suggestions, and some may not be just hugely expensive, but things that might allow, for example, Customs and Border Protection to better see what kind of queues are developing from farther out than they can visually just see from standing at the port of entry. That might help them operate, change their management of personnel throughout the day to move traffic better. So the model that we'll bring to the region, I think, is going to be a great tool. It'll be, of course, a computer model that we'll then give to the city of El Paso, your MPO. You can have access to it if you would like that, along with training for your technical staff that will leave in the region, and they can operate it. They can, if there are other ideas after the study is complete about what you'd like to test, that can be pretty easily done, and then you'll have answers there. And the model will show you visually how queues are developing and how things are moving through the port today, and then with changes that we recommend, or if nothing is done, how things will operate in the future. So hopefully it'll be a very visual, very real looking tool that you can then see very clearly what happens out there. So timeline, again, I mentioned trying to finalize data gathering in this month, and we think we can do that. We'll put the remaining data into the traffic models early part of December. So hopefully around December, January, we hope to be able to come back to our advisory committee with a list of preliminary recommendations that we'll, again, take back out to the stakeholders that we've identified. We have a fairly extensive email list that we have emails back and forth with groups and individuals. We do have a website. It's I think it's at the end of the presentation, but it's one word, elpasoborderplan.org, and would invite you certainly to take a look at that. Anything we have created, from our scope through a work plan to technical data to the list of 160 solutions to what we'll produce from here on through the end of the study, is on the website. And you can also give feedback directly to Jim Brogan, our project manager, through that website there at the elpasoborderplan.org. So that concludes the presentation, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that I can.
I'd just like to make a comment. Mark, I believe this is really probably the most comprehensive look at bridges anywhere along any border. Is that correct? And this could potentially be used as a model for other locales. With kind of what we're doing here is somewhat groundbreaking and extremely comprehensive.
Really true, Scott. It's certainly much more detailed. I think, you hear and people can show you previous studies that have been done. Typically, they're much higher level and much less detailed. we understand it's the first time that individual ports of entry and thinking of them as a system, modeling how individual ports work and how they work interactively is really a first of its kind. And I can tell you from the Federal Highway Administration folks I've talked to, USDOT people, I spoke at a joint working committee meeting out in San Diego, which is a group of individuals who represent entities on both sides of the border, state and federal, and a high degree of interest in your plan and the thinking, as Scott says, that this could definitely be a model for other regions throughout the country along the border.
Just a couple of things. Number one, about the Zaragoza, the Bridge of the Americas, Boda. When you talk about tolling that bridge is not tolled by international treaty.
Right.
So if, in the scenario, you have to think about both that tolling it will involve an amendment to a treaty between the two countries and the senates of both countries that approve any amendments to international treaties. And so it's a rather lengthy and complex process. And there's a lot of opposition to that in Mexico, for what I can tell. So and we have to contemplate the fact that it may take a long time and it may not even be possible because the SCT in Mexico may simply say, look, we're not interested in tolling it.
Sure.
And that's just the way it's going to be. And we could toy around with potential scenarios, however, to turn it into an all northbound bridge and have an all southbound bridge, right? Complemented with another one that will be tolled.
Right.
That could potentially help in adding infrastructure and without touching the free nature of the bridge, something like that. The other thing is the bureaucracies that work on the border they tend to see their mission in terms of functions and what their jurisdiction is. And I have the feeling that, particularly after September 11th, but even before, probably since 1980 or so, the bureaucracies that work on the bridge tend to see their primary job not as facilitating traffic, but as law enforcing. And they have to balance the mission of law enforcement with facilitating traffic. And in fact, my feeling is that they've never seen their job as facilitating traffic. And they probably will tell you that they're not there to facilitate anything. If anything, they're there to implement the law. And if you don't get them to think in terms of a balance between law enforcement and facilitation, it's going to be very difficult to get them to make the adjustments necessary for increasing the efficiency of the use of the infrastructure.
Well, I can tell you our reaction to the discussions we've had with Customs and Border Patrol, for example, have been very positive. We gauge their attitude to be very open. Of course, I would agree that they see their mission as one of security, clearly.
Right.
But, they work and live here too, and they understand the cost of congestion and the cost of all this wait times and waiting that occurs. And so I would say, maybe optimistically, but I think realistically, they're potentially more open to thoughts and ideas that move vehicles than maybe they were in the past. And I think they're not going to compromise security, period. And I don't think anybody would want to suggest that they do that. But they're very open to some of the ideas, like the specialization of the bridges, having one bridge, say, just dedicated to commercial traffic, or changing the one-way, two-way to a one-way. That actually would facilitate better use of their manpower in many cases and make their operations more efficient, to help with their training. So it's the commonality of those missions where they do come together that we're trying to look for. And I would say, in terms of tolling, Bridge of the Americas obviously would be very complex, potentially very difficult to do, would have some cost involved in doing that if you ultimately got to that point. But I think one of the big values of this plan will be, it will take some of the speculation out of that question that exists in the region today, because I can tell you there are many people that we've talked to who just say they think intuitively, yes, you should do it. It makes sense. Why give a free passage there? You would spread, just it's an intuitive thing. They believe it would help. And many others are just as adamantly opposed to that. So without trying to address those extremes and attitudes, we'll be able to tell you, hopefully, if you did it, this is what would occur. This is what would change, be potentially better, and here would be the cost of doing that as well. So
Just one more point. I have a lot of respect for the work that CBP does and the other bureaucracies on the border, but it is also my experience over 10 years that I've been working in the region and studying this very issue, that they will always say, yes, sure, okay, yeah, we're open, and then they're not. So, we have to always take what they say with a grain of salt, because they're not always entirely transparent, even though I understand they're in a difficult position, and I understand their mission, and they're good at it for the most part, but often they say, yeah, sure, and then they move on, okay?
sure.
You're aware that there's two other groups that are working on the model ports of entry, I believe, the
Right.
PDN and the county just issued an RFP for a pilot. Is there any synergy between what you guys are doing and what these other people are doing, or are we working
Right.
absent any collaboration?
No, definitely are we've coordinated extensively with Paso del Norte and the other groups that you mentioned, trying to, as much as possible, link up the thoughts and ideas. And so, yes, working very closely with those groups.
Well, along that line, the county project Secure Border Trade, which is funded by Federal Highway Administration and also has the support of CBP, to Dr. Bayan's point, for the first time, we have a commissioner, Alan Burson, of CBP, who is from the border and has said publicly that he wants to not only make sure that obviously security is the highest priority, but also facilitate trade as an equal priority. So that's really refreshing, and somebody who understands the issues of the border because he's from San Diego. But getting back to secure border trade with the county, that will be implemented by the first quarter of next year. So I just wanted to express a concern based on what Ralph is talking about, that there needs to be maybe better coordination, because by the time the recommendations are issued, that project is going to be off the ground.
We can certainly circle back with them. We've made initial outreach and contact with them, but I would agree, you're correct, and the timing of those is critical. We need to make sure that they do work together and certainly don't conflict one another. So we'll make that effort and make sure that happens.
I just have two more comments. One, as an advisory committee member, I've been really impressed with the fact that really there's no preconceived notions going into this model port entry study. Everything's on the table, as it should be, whether it be tolling VODA, and then you go through and take a look at what makes the most sense and what is implementable. And there's been a lot of resources thrown at this. It's an expensive study, and they're not just looking at data. They've had a lot of people on the bridges documenting the southbound inspection, northbound wait times. So they're taking the very best of what they're getting from CBP, the data, the collections, and they're running that through various models, but they're also getting a lot of firsthand observation of what is actually happening on the bridges today. And I'm excited about the potential for what this can do for the region and a long-term impact. I think this is a study that can really make some fundamental changes in how we move pedestrians, how we move individuals in their private vehicles, how we move commercial cargo back and forth across the bridges. So thank you for your assistance with this.
Just one more quick comment. Going back to the system inventory, I assume that one of the stakeholders is TxDOT, since you're looking at existing roads and the possible tollway on Cesar Chavez?
Correct, yes, sir. And didn't mention, but we're working very closely with our district here, Chuck Berry and his folks, Eduardo. We have Blanca Del Valle working with us very closely on public involvement. Also Gus Sanchez, one of their engineers, part of the engineering staff out there. So yes, definitely TxDOT here in El Paso has been very closely involved.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
No, just, I think that the other issue that I would definitely explore rather well and spend time on is the issue of the privatization of the bridges.
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing because it's not something that we have thought about here on the West Texas border. I think it would be a new experience. I know that, there's all kinds of misgivings about that, so it'd be a good idea to explore that. I'm not opposed to the privatization of the bridges, but clearly it's something that would be so new that we'd have to consider a number of variables.
Well, we'll have a lot of things to think about when the
Yeah.
study results start to filter out and we start to see those. So,
Very exciting.
indeed.
I can tell you from the work that we've done with City of El Paso staff, they're beginning to think in those terms as well, and they're pondering the possibility of putting forth the mechanics of doing that. So I think the plan will be timely in that respect for them as well.
It's just that when you think about those things, one of the things that we haven't talked about enough is that the bridges are never our bridges. That is the U.S. bridges. They're always the binational bridges. And so there's a very complicated bureaucracy and a very complicated attitude on the other side of the border as well. And if you ever put the table of privatization on the SCT, for example, they may never want to do that. I mean, the revenue, the motivations are clear. When you look at the DCL, for example, the motivation on the U.S. side was always security. And it costs $130 for 5 years. They don't really care about the money. They just care that you are a secured traveler and you go through for 5 years for $120, $29, I think. On the Mexican side, the number one priority was the revenue, and that's why it costs $300 a year. And they don't check anybody. Anybody can get it. Doesn't matter. You just go get it, pay. So the priorities are not necessarily the same. So when you have two different priorities checking in there, we got to be able to match priorities in such a way that we agree to it. So it's a rather complicated scenario, and I hope the study, I'm excited about it because I think it's the most comprehensive thing that I've seen about it, but let's not forget that there's the other piece missing, and that their attitude may be completely different. They may say, no, it's not going to, the voter is never going to be told, forget that. And the attitude might be privatization is not on the table, forget it. So the work is going to be very lengthy and it's going to have to be very well thought out.
And we hope to leave the region leadership with good information to use in their decisions as they move forward. That's our goal.
Mark, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very timely information. If a new bridge is determined to be built, hopefully we can be involved in that process and facilitate that process down the road. So this gives us a lot to think about as these results start to come out. Item 5, update, discussion, and action on a board resolution authorizing the chair, vice chair, secretary, and executive director to execute any required certificates and agreements in connection with the State Infrastructure Bank loan closing for Loop 375 at I-10, the Americas Interchange Project. Mr. Tejas.
Yes, Raymond Tejas, Executive Director with the CRRMA. This item, by way of background, deals with the Americas Interchange, which, as a reminder, is a $146 million project. The 146 comes from several funding sources. The main one is $96 million from the CRRMA stimulus fund dollars. We also have $15 million from the Coordinated Border Infrastructure Fund, which is also federal funding from the federal government, and also a $5 million pass-through financing component. That leaves $30 million, which comes from the State Infrastructure Bank loan that this entity, the RMA, has signed with the State Infrastructure Bank that is essentially run by TxDOT. What we have here today, and several of you may find this item familiar, as this item has actually gone before the board before. However, because we have a couple of new members, and really as a kind of a reminder for the remainder of the board, we've decided to bring this back. Paul Braden is here, who is our bond counsel, and he's going to walk you through the resolution and really the next steps for closing the State Infrastructure Bank loan for $30 million. So with that, Mr. Braden.
Good morning. Paul Braden with Fulbright & Jaworski, bond counsel for the RMA. As Raymond mentioned, this really is almost a little bit of a belt and suspenders associated with some action that the RMA board took on June 30th. But for the benefit of the public and for the benefit of the new board members, I'll just kind of outline what the transaction was. During the course of, even prior before June, we, working with Raymond and your financial advisor, have been negotiating a State Infrastructure Bank loan with TxDOT. And there had been some preliminary, and this loan is payable from a revenue source, which is the TRZs that were formed by the city. This particular loan is payable from TRZ number 2. So that's the revenue source that's going to pay this loan. And then in addition to that, the city signed a contract where if those TRZ revenues are not sufficient, the TRZ will backstop that loan. Excuse me, the city will backstop that loan. So the city will provide additional revenues to the extent that the TRZ doesn't generate enough revenues to pay debt service on the loan. Because of that structure, we've kind of ended up getting a pretty decent interest rate. The loan itself carries an interest rate of 4.95%. It's a 30-year loan. Interest begins payable on September 15 of 2011, so it's immediately payable next year and next fiscal year for the city. Principal is deferred for 2 years, so you don't start making principal payments for a couple of years. And then principal is somewhat backloaded because the expectation is the TRZ will generate more revenues in later years, so that hopefully the revenues will start matching the principal payments. What was a really neat feature about this loan is we structured it as a Build America bond. And as some of you may be familiar with, is one of the programs under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act era that was passed in 2009 allowed government entities to issue a certain type of debt that was available for a federal subsidy. And so what the RMA is actually doing in the form of this loan is it's issuing a note to TxDOT, and that note will be carrying a 4.95% interest rate, which the RMA, through these sources identified, will pay to TxDOT. But they also will receive a subsidy equal to 35% of the interest component on that note. So the federal government will send a check to the RMA once a year, because your interest is payable once a year, for that amount of money. And what we've negotiated with the city and with TxDOT is that half of that subsidy will go to pay debt service. So 50% of the amount you receive will go to pay debt service on the loan and the note, but the other 50% can be retained by the RMA for any lawful purpose. So through this federal government program, we not only got a decent rate with the state, and we got a subsidy that goes towards paying that rate, we also got a revenue source for the RMA going forward for the next 30 years.
Paul?
Yes, sir.
Are those, the part we keep, it's not encumbered by aren't any strings attached to it, right?
Correct. And the part, 50% of it goes to them. The other 50%,
our pieces.
you can use it for any legal purpose.
And Paul, our first payments start in 2011 or 2012?
The first interest payment is September 15, 2011.
2011. And I saw some numbers right around $200,000 coming into the RMA. Is that?
I think that's right. Over the life of the payment stream, it's about $4.8 million over the 30 years. And I think the first payment's just under $200,000, $199 and change. So it'll be a nice revenue stream to help the operations of the RMA. What this resolution today does, there were a couple items which we already had prior approval for, but I'm coming forward and I'm going to ask your board officers and your executive director to sign certain documents. And I think to some extent there was a level of comfort that if we had a recent resolution that sort of authorized those executions, some of it was associated with that. Also on June 30th, when we came to the first resolution before us, the paying agent agreement wasn't completely negotiated with the paying agent. For your First Southwest company, your financial advisor had conducted sort of an RFP, identified a paying agent, which you all hired, but the final terms of the agreement weren't, in the former agreement that was submitted to the board, the final terms weren't finished. So this resolution also has the complete paying agent agreement before you. This is a little different, this type of note is a little different than what your outstanding SPUR 601 bonds are. In that case, you actually have a trustee, and so a trustee manages all the money, it all comes in, and they sort of are in charge of it all. The revenue source goes directly to them, and they pay it out. A paying agent is a little less of a responsibility. Their fiduciary duty doesn't necessarily run to the bondholders. It runs to you, and it's a paying agent of yours. And it's really a convenience both for TxDOT and for the RMA. And the paying agent basically is in charge for making payments on this loan. And so the way it's set up is that the city will transfer TRZ money over on a monthly basis into accounts, and the paying agent sort of keeps track of that money, and it also will file for you the paperwork that you have to file with the federal government to get your subsidy. And so the subsidy will come into the paying agent, and it'll put half in an account that you have access to, other half in the debt service account. And then it will look at that pot of money that comes from the monthly TRZ payments and the subsidy and determine whether that's sufficient to make the next payment due. So prior to September 15th of every year, it'll determine if it has enough money in the kitty to make that payment. If it doesn't, it turns around and tells the city of El Paso, because it has a backstop, that you have to transfer this much more money over so we can make that payment. So it sort of is in charge of coordinating those details in terms of so that this loan will be paid, pretty, of course, on time, but without much oversight with you guys. The other documents that really are looking for approval is the SIB loan agreement with TxDOT was already signed and was dated as of August 13th. Attached to that loan agreement, much like commercial loans, was a form of note. So the SIB loan agreement approved a initial form of note, but it was attached as a form because we didn't have the closing date yet. So now what's going to be signed by the chair and attested to by the secretary will be the actual note itself. And so the 4.95%, the payment stream, and all that is documented in this 3-page note that's going to be signed. In addition, as part of the SIB loan agreement, there's a requirement that there be a certificate signed, which is a closing certificate. It has a couple things in it. One, it identifies the signatures of the board officers who are signing, indicates they're appropriate officers to sign, have the capacity to sign. It says there's no litigation out there that's contesting any of the board members' positions or contesting this loan, and just typical representations that you make in connection with the closing. I should also remind everyone that this process will be reviewed by the Attorney General of the state of Texas, and once the AG signs off on the process, the note itself will be registered with the Texas Comptroller, and then the physical note, of course, will be delivered to TxDOT as part of the closing. The closing we're aiming for is December 9th, so basically 30 days from now. And we're going to file with the Attorney General tomorrow a transcript of all the original documents so they can start the review process.
I have a question. It's more of a political scientist question. I'm glad that the federal government is kind of subsidizing the loan, but we know that there is yet another wave shift, political shift in Washington, and it has to do with the budget deficit. What would happen if Congress all of a sudden decides to cap the knife and say those subsidies are going to dry out and we're not going to dish out those monies? Are they guaranteed for the number of years that we need them, or are we at the mercy of a new Congress that may come quite aggressive to cut funding right and left?
And I'll say a couple things. Excuse me. One, this legislation expires at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. So the BAB authority disappears without any extensions being passed. And there's been a lot of discussion prior to the midterm elections about extensions, and then the subsidy would go down for the next couple of years. Mm-hmm. I think realistically, and the consensus in the community now is, with the midterm elections happening the way they did, very few people consider that the BABs will be extended beyond this year. Or at the very least, there'll be a gap before any kind of extension beyond. So this program probably goes away in terms of anybody else qualifying for it at the end of the year. And there are a lot of people rushing to issue BABs with that expectation in mind. And that's part of the reason we're closing this deal in December, because we want to get our subsidy in. With respect to, are the subsidies guaranteed? This subsidy is not subject to annual appropriation. It's not in the nature of that. It's more in the nature of a tax refund. The same type of legislation that authorizes the federal government to pay us back money that we overpaid is the type of authorization that this subsidy sits in. And when we first started beginning to do BABs, a lot of big issuers asked that same question, saying, well, what if the federal government changes their mind and we've committed to a 30-year debt with the expectation of getting a subsidy? Now the subsidy goes away in 5 years because they want to save money. Right. And the truth of the matter is, while it's not guaranteed, while it is in a sense guaranteed, the person who's setting the rules is the Congress. And so can Congress always change his mind and take different things? Well, of course they could. They could pass a different law. But there have literally been billions of dollars issued under the BABS program. And the political will associated with making such a change would be hard to fathom. The state of Texas has issued billions of dollars. California has issued billions of dollars. So there are a lot of big boys who are playing in that arena who will probably protect our $30 million interest. And then there's been very, very little debate at all that they would ever, even in the face of this type of situation, cut the existing bond subsidy. The expectation is that we're not going to do it on a going forward basis, and that's how we're going to start controlling it.
Paul, for clarification, normally and historically, the chairman and secretary, sign the documents executed by executive director. Why are you asking for the vice chair and well, for the vice chair as well, it looks like you've
Yeah.
got the executive committee.
Actually, some of that is just to have people available if the AG came back to ask for an additional certificate. That's the main reason. The people who will be signing the document would be the chair and the secretary, in terms of, chair signs several documents, the secretary has to attest to certain documents, and then the executive director. I don't currently anticipate that the vice chair would have to sign anything. We're just getting that additional authorization if for some reason, Scott was not available at the last minute and we needed something signed. But what we anticipate signed right now is by the chair and the secretary, and then Raymond has authority to really sign any additional closing certificates and those type of things.
I understanding the treasurer needed to sign some documents today. Is that not correct?
The treasurer actually signs one certificate as an alternative signature. So the only thing he sort of signs is, this is my signature, and it has to be notarized in front of a notary. But he doesn't sign any sort of substantive documents.
And I believe those documents will be signed today at the end of the board meeting and will be notarized today on the 9th floor. Is that correct, Mr. Tejas?
That's correct. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Braden? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other comments, Mr. Tejas?
No, other than to thank Mr. Braden. Other than that, just a motion, please, on the resolution before you.
Got it. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Discuss item 6, discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the executive director to execute an interlocal agreement with the city of El Paso for the implementation of the I-10 corridor aesthetic improvement project. Mr. Tejas?
The board will recognize this item as it's been before us the last couple of months. Thankfully and fortunately, we actually are able to take action today. This item, generally speaking, is an agreement between the City of El Paso and the Camino Real CRRMA to jointly develop the aesthetic project, which, as you'll recall, through the 2008 Comprehensive Mobility Plan, is really an attempt to look at an approximately 28-mile corridor of I-10 from Loop 375 on the east side at the Americas interchange to Loop 375 on the west side at Trans Mountain. And the intent of the project is to identify those intersections and those interchanges that require aesthetic improvement and begin to implement some of those improvements up to a total project cost of $10 million. What you have before you then is the interlocal that actually establishes the relationship and the requirements of the City of El Paso and the RMA with regard to this project. Essentially what we've done is the City of El Paso, through its Museums and Cultural Affairs Department, has brought on an artist that specializes in aesthetic improvements for highways. And her name is Vicky Scurry. And in fact, they did this at yesterday's City Council meeting. So they've brought her on as part of the team. The RMA will bring, and this action was taken at last month's board meeting, the RMA has brought on its general engineering consultant for the engineering and technical aspects of environmental review and actual design plans. So the team makeup then is the city's artist and the RMA's engineer. So we bring those two forces together and we actually implement the project. Now, of course, as you'll note in the interlocal agreement, there is reference to a steering committee, which is made up of not only City of El Paso members, including engineers and the city manager and the Museums and Cultural Affairs Department representatives, but also the RMA is represented, as is Texas Department of Transportation, the local region folks as well. So that steering committee will guide the team, meaning the artists and the engineers, with regard to what improvements we'd like to see. So of course, beyond that, we'll keep the board apprised of the developments of the team. So with that in mind, I'd ask for any questions on the interlocal. Actually, before that, let me mention as well, I mentioned that Vicky Scurry was brought on by the city yesterday through the city council meeting. After that action was this interlocal, and the interlocal was approved unanimously, but was approved yesterday as well. So subject to your questions, that's the item before you today.
Is the city going to pay Ms. Scurry's fee?
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that. The $10 million total project cost comes from Category 2 funds from TxDOT. So this is a TxDOT project, or rather a TxDOT funded project that is being implemented by the RMA through coordination with TxDOT and the city. What we're doing in this interlocal actually is, it relates back to the availability of those $10 million. 5 million of those 10 million the earliest drawdown that we could make on the 10 million is a $5 million amount that becomes available in September of 2011. The city, however, was interested in developing this project earlier and not waiting until next September. So what we've done here is the city has provided essentially advanced funding in the amount of up to $500,000 so that we could begin the work with the artists and the engineers. That, say, for example, if we spend $300,000, $400,000 between now and September of 2011, the city would be reimbursed once the RMA had access to the initial $5 million. Beyond that, there are several additional drawdowns from TxDOT in the amount of, I believe, $2 million, and $1 million in the following June of 2012, 13, and 14. So that's how the money will flow to us.
So who's paying for the late?
Ultimately, the $10 million pays for the artist.
As a side note, too, I sat in the other day in a presentation or an update on the Southern Relief Route from TxDOT to the city. This item came up, and so we're going to have the ability to take some of these conceptual drawings and move them into other projects to have some sort of symmetry, if the funding is available, to create kind of a unique, all-encompassing design. Is that correct, Mr. Tejas, should we so desire?
Well, and that's a really good point, too, because one of the intents of this, when you look at this agreement and the work product presented by the artists, it really comes in two segments. The first is the development of a conceptual design plan, excuse me, which will identify the proposed designs for the I-10 corridor. And this artist is really being paid for the I-10 corridor only. These project funds are for I-10 only. However, the development of this conceptual design plan document, then, the components in there can be used anywhere in the region. And the value of that document is that, although $10 million is a significant amount of money, with regard to the 28 miles of I-10 that needs to be improved, the $10 million won't make it that far. So the value of this document is that this will sit on the RMA shelf, TxDOT's shelf, the City of El Paso shelf, and all the surrounding communities' shelves, and it's available to anybody who would like to improve a segment in their area. And the value really is to keep that symmetry, as you mentioned, Mr. McLaughlin, and also it keeps a uniformity for all of I-10. So there's real value in that. The second, I'm sorry, just real briefly then, the second component is to bring the artist back in to oversee the design development and the actual construction.
In previous meetings, Mr. Chairman, I have expressed my misgivings about this project for two reasons. One, we're in lean times and spending money, and I know that the project was justified partly on the grounds that we should take advantage of the $5 million funds from the federal government, and the city was going to get the other $5 million in there. We're going to spend those $10 million in beautification projects, and so it would be essentially letting go of $5 million at a time when the federal government was kind of dishing out the money. And I was not in agreement with that. And the other issue was the beautification issue. And I'm not against beauty, but I don't think that it's the RMA's job to be doing beautification projects in the city. That does not facilitate mobility in any way. And so to be consistent with my previous votes, I'm probably going to abstain on this one item. So I just want to, there for the record.
Dr. Payan, thank you for your comments. I would remind you, though, that as partners to the Comprehensive Mobility Plan, this has been a portion of the Comprehensive Mobility Plan that we're partners with the city, TxDOT, the El Paso MPO, and the RMA. So this has been on the approved Comprehensive Mobility Plan that we've all approved and agreed to move forward with. So on item 6, is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
I abstain.
Dr. Payan abstains. Motion carries. Item 7, discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the executive director to execute work authorization number 7 with PBS&J for the Loop 375 Cesar Chavez Managed Lanes project.
Raymond Tejas again. As a reminder, at last month's board meeting, you had an item before you referred to as the financial assistance agreement, the FAA, between the Camino Real RMA and TxDOT. And the intent of that financial assistance agreement was to grant the RMA with the authority to pursue the Cesar Chavez portion of the Southern Relief Route. That also granted access to the RMA to $80.25 million to pursue that project. So what you see before you here is item number 7 is the actual work authorization with our general engineering consultant to begin that work. As a reminder, and for the benefit of our new members, we have a general engineering consultant on board who essentially provides us with all of our engineering services. And the way that works is we have one master agreement from which all of the terms and conditions of our relationship are defined. And from there, when an individual project is brought forward, then the RMA and the GEC, the general engineering consultant, enter into a work authorization for that particular project. So that's the structure that you see before you. So subject to your questions, this is a request for authorization to sign work authorization number 7 for Cesar Chavez.
Any questions? Motion to approve item number 7.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Item 8, update, presentation, and discussion on Loop 375 Joe Battle at FM 659 Zaragoza project. Mr. Tejas had an idea, which I thought was great, that on a regular basis, we update the board on kind of a pending project, what we've got going on. So as we've had a number of things happening, it's a good way to kind of refresh us with what's happening on this current project today. Mr. Tejas?
Okay, I'm moving over to the podium as we have a PowerPoint for this project. See if I can get it going here. So what we're talking about today is Loop 375 Joe Battle at FM 659, which is Zaragoza. This is a project briefing for you all. The Camino Real RMA became involved with this project through the Comprehensive Mobility Plan in 2008. Where the RMA became a partner to the Comprehensive Mobility Plan. As a reminder, the Comprehensive Mobility Plan anticipates approximately $1 billion worth of transportation improvements for the region that include tolled and non-tolled projects, as well as aesthetic roadway improvements and bus rapid transit projects. The Comprehensive Mobility Plan has 15 projects identified within it, and of those 15, the RMA is involved in 8 of them. You'll note under the non-toll projects, we have the first one is the Americas Interchange, which is well underway. The next one is the Zaragoza project, which we'll talk about today. The third one is the Northeast Main Lanes expansion, which we'll talk about on another day, and also the aesthetic project, which we spoke about earlier. That leaves the toll projects, which are identified below as well. This is the Comprehensive Mobility Plan map. And from those projects that the RMA are developing, you'll note in the top in red, item number 3 is the Northeast Main Lanes project. Item number 5 over to the right on the east side is the project we'll discuss today. And number 6 is the interchange. The yellow, item number 11, is the aesthetic project, and the remaining blue projects are all of the toll projects. So again, the Zaragoza Direct Connector project is within the 2008 Comprehensive Mobility Plan, and the intent of the project is really to develop 2 direct connectors and related improvements at the interchange between Loop 375 at Joe Battle and the Zaragoza FM 659 corridor. This is a project map. It gives you a better idea about where we're talking, where Zaragoza intersects with Joe Battle. Now, the reason for the project really is to address several issues. TxDOT had identified the need to improve the operation of the interchange of 375 in Zaragoza by adding direct connectors, which will improve access to and reduce congestion for both Joe Battle and Zaragoza. The implementation of this project will improve safety for the traveling public and protect the economic vitality of the area through the provision of safe and convenient access for residential and commercial development along the Joe Battle and Zaragoza corridors. Now, this really comes from a white paper that TxDOT has developed, so it really gives you almost the purpose and need for the project from TxDOT's view. At this point, and you'll see actually the aerial over to the right on this slide of what the 2 direct connectors will look like. When you're heading north on Joe Battle, you'll be able to directly drop into Zaragoza, and the reverse as well from Zaragoza heading south onto Loop 375. At this point, I'm going to ask Mike Rudd, who is an engineer with our general engineering consultant group, to come forward, and he's got a couple of an aerial and some videos he'd like to show you as well from a more technical standpoint. Yes, sir.
Okay, just for clarification, we've already broke ground on this or not yet?
No, sir. And we'll get to the timeline on this in a couple of slides, but this project is in development now and will be turned over to us hopefully early next year.
Now the environmental is fairly close to being completed. Is it completed on this project?
Yes, it is.
Right.
And we've got that on a slide as well,
Super.
coming up.
Mr. Rudd, welcome.
Good morning. Mike Rudd with the RMA GEC team. As Raymond said, this is the project is developed to help several things: safety, access, and just operations in the system as general. There we go. Try to pull some of this stuff up. If you've all have been on this at any point in time, you know how congested this area can be.
The access too is somewhat convoluted. I mean, it seems like if there's a kind of a winding turnaround that these two direct connectors are going to fix, correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct. At least that is the intent. Still trying to get something sorted in here. There we go. What I'd like to do is, this is an aerial of the existing area. It shows 375, Montwood, and then Zaragoza. It's taking a little bit of time pulling up. My intent was to kind of walk you through what the existing conditions was if our system will allow. Yeah, that's not playing. Come on, come on.
Mr. Tays, can we get a little help from the IT staff?
It's not letting me.
Being a Texas A&M graduate, I understand these snafus completely, so it's not a problem.
EA is one I clicked on. First one up there. Yeah. Just a picture. We should be able to zoom in on that. It's not allowing us to do that. No, that's okay. We'll just move on with that. Technology is great when it works. That's okay. That's all right. We can work through this without that, and we'll catch it on another section. But anyway, the intent was to show what is currently happening in the area right now at the interchange. Hey, look at that. Now I can't get it out. That's great. Okay. Anyway, the existing traffic going north on 375 has to exit at the exit prior to Montwood to get to Zaragoza. It goes through the Montwood intersection, and then it turns right onto Zaragoza. On southbound, we come down Zaragoza, we go, it's 2-lane, go underneath 375 southbound on the frontage road through Montwood, and then onto an entrance ramp on 375 south. Obviously, with that kind of maneuvering, you have a lot of congestion, you have a lot of pileups and backup, and so I will get out of this lovely little tool. And one of the benefits of going through an evaluation and recommendation is looking at traffic model simulation. And what I'm going to show you now is the design year 2035 no-build condition for this area, showing what the traffic will look like.
If we don't build?
If we do not build the direct connectors, that is correct. I'll give you the full screen. And just from a viewpoint, the Montwood is in the middle there. It's in green. It goes. Let me back up just a little bit more. This was a study that was commissioned by the TxDOT for the Montwood Zaragoza Loop 375 area, and we're taking this as part of the Zaragoza information. But Montwood is the east-west roadway that's it's in the middle. Of course, Loop 375, Joe Battles north-south, and you can see Zaragoza to the right at the top. And this is a visual simulation of what traffic is doing in that area based on the transborder model and additional traffic counts, and as of July of 2009.
And I believe I've seen some population studies that look like we're going to have well over 1 million people just in El Paso alone in that time period.
That is correct, yes, sir. As you can see, going north on 375, there's the exit to the frontage road on 375 going up to Montwood. This is a thing to take note of. Look at the traffic back up there as we get up to Montwood, the congestion in that area. And here we approach Montwood, and again, looking at just going on the north side.
Almost looks like one of our international bridges.
Pretty close. Again, as we continue on up to Zaragoza, to the northeast. And again, as you see on the south side, heading south on Zaragoza, there's a significant congestion in that area too, going underneath Montwood to get to the southbound 375. I'm south on Zaragoza, sorry. And again, this study was encompassed 375 North, Montwood, and Zaragoza. So as we pull in and out, there's areas that are not as part of our project. This is the interchange here between the two properties, between J.C. Penney's development on the north side and Home Depot on the south side of Zaragoza. Just showing that interchange. There's currently there is a signal at that point allowing traffic to cross, and we, as you'll see later, we'll accommodate that. But again, here's the traffic going southbound, going underneath 375. Entering Loop 375 frontage road, and again the congestion on that, and then going through Montwood. And then it'll head south to get back onto 375 south. And I'll stop it there because then we'll looking at the west side. What I'd like to pull up now is what we're proposing to do to help resolve some of this congestion issue and ease access and also safety. This is the schematic that TxDOT has completed, and it has been approved by TxDOT and by FHWA. Let me.
And design, TxDOT was responsible for the design on this, for 30% of the design, is that correct?
For the completion of the schematic, which basically equates to about 30% of the design, that is correct. In addition to, as Raymond has said, in addition to completing the environmental and acquiring right-of-way for the project.
And I believe almost all of that is done, and so we're about 30% of the design completed once TxDOT is finished with their portion.
That is correct. That would be a good place for the continuation of design at that point at 30%. There may be some details that were not included in the schematic that'll have to be updated, but for the most part, that's correct.
This is a $32 million project, is that correct?
That is correct. It's $32 million. What I'm trying to do is rotate this for you so it actually looks like we're back up into the north window.
That $32 million is the cost going forward, right?
$32 million is a total cost, combination of different things. I also think there's a SIB loan component of this, if my memory is certainly correct. Okay.
And TxDOT's previous contribution is part of the $32 million?
Raymond will cover.
Okay. So.
Started with that. Okay. Again, we'll go along. What our intent is here is to build two direct connectors, each single lane, one going northbound 375 to Zaragoza, and one coming from Zaragoza south to connect to Loop 375 south. And I'll walk you through that with this schematic. The existing exit ramp that's on 375 to get to 375 frontage road will remain. Immediately after that, we will have the direct connector entrance, as you can see right here. You'll head north and you'll see the orange color, which is actually the start of the bridge or the direct connector that goes over Montwood and ties into Zaragoza. And as I said earlier, the intersection there with the crossroad for the development property, River Oaks Development, has a signal on it, and we've accommodated in the schematic. We've accommodated that by extending the direct connectors over that signalized intersection. And then the ultimate is to have 3 lanes in each direction on Zaragoza all the way out to Montwood. And so this is a start of that to get us to Sunfire to the north. And you'll see that in the upper right. As we're coming down Zaragoza going south, we will maintain the 2-lane Zaragoza Road. We'll have a single direct connector entrance that flies over 375. And as you see at the interchange on Zaragoza and 375, what occurs right now is we have 2 lanes that go through Zaragoza underneath 375 to get to the southbound frontage road of 375. And on the southbound frontage road north of Zaragoza, we have a left turn lane that goes up underneath the bridge. In our proposed condition, we are taking that left turn out and making the traffic move to Montwood at the make the U-turn there to come back to access Zaragoza. And again, as we go through, we'll come down, cross over Montwood, and then again tie in at 375 before the existing on-ramp on 375. And with that, let me pull up the simulation model for that again. And this is for, again, year 2035 when we will be building. Come on. Let me just back up here a little bit. As you can see again on the right, the blue is the existing exit ramp onto the frontage road. And as we come past that, you'll see the entrance here to the direct connector. Again, note on the frontage road on 375, you don't see as much congestion backing up to Montwood. And that is the intent of this direct connector. With the traffic coming in the evening, off of work coming from I-10 up, this helps significantly. We're estimating about 10,000 cars a day will be using this direct connector.
That's at the front end, or that's in 2035?
That is at 2035.
Any idea what it is once we complete it?
I think the original estimate for 2015 is about 7,000 cars, if I'm not mistaken.
Super.
And again, going back to Zaragoza, looking at what the connection is there and with the increased flow. Now, unfortunately, this model does not show that signal, does not show the crossing there at that point. We are working with River Oaks Development to make sure that signal stays in place. And again, the schematic does accommodate that, and we'll adjust the timing on the light so it does not impact Zaragoza. And again, at the lights at Zaragoza and the 375 northbound frontage road, lessen congestion. And again, you take off another 10,000 going through southbound through Montwood and on to southbound loop 375. That is it. We, it's with the design, obviously, what we had talked about earlier is about the 30%. We have accommodated the access on 375 and Zaragoza to any existing or future commercial development. One of the things that the developer has worked with us on is locating a new pond for the drainage for this system. And you can see here it's highlighted, hatched in the blue. That's where we're going to take all of our drainage. This will go from a rural section with ditches to a curb and gutter with storm sewer system. So obviously we have to handle that on the Zaragoza side, as well as taking the flow off of the direct connectors.
It's going to take, I think, 865 days to build Americus, as what was in the contract for Americus. How long would it take once this project is let to build this project? Any idea? Is this a 400-day project? What would this be?
This would probably be closer to 400, 450 days, yes, sir.
All right.
And probably a little bit less than that, but that's probably a good estimate.
You know, as I've looked at the various projects, Americus was a design-build project. And I think one of the things we're looking at here is, with a smaller project of this magnitude, is a design bid-build make sense? Does a design-build make sense? Do you have any suggestions to the board as we move forward and looking forward as far as how we structure this?
Well, I think that's something that Mr. Tejas and the GEC are still talking about. We're looking at what those opportunities will be, what some of the pitfalls may be with going with either one of those. As you said, typically a design-build, you're looking at bigger projects. The individual company coming in for a $32 million project has to mobilize. That cost is significant, and that tends to chew up a lot of the dollars. It may be suited more for somebody who is local, but that doesn't give us a lot of competition when we start going out for design build. So I have my opinions, but I think that at this point that the GEC is still reviewing all the options for that, which makes the most sense to the RMA and to the community.
So we'll have that decision to address as we go down the road. So,
Correct.
Mr. Rudd, thank you very much.
Can I ask a couple questions real quick on that? Just very quickly, the growth model estimates, or the population growth model estimates a number of people, and you were mentioning 12,000 vehicles by 2035 and so forth. What is that based on census figures? Where's the data on population growth? It seems to me that what happens if the population growth out east, which I think will probably be the case, we're always underestimating population growth. What happens if it outstrips the projection? And two, do you foresee that there might be any other ramps needed there? It's a complex intersection because you got Joe Battle, you got Zaragoza coming in kind of at an angle, and then you got Montwood like this. And I've been around there, and it is a very complex, and you can miss Zaragoza very easily if you keep going on Joe Battle. So I wonder if there's going to be any other interchange that's going to be needed around there, and if we're accommodating that potential for the future.
As I mentioned, the study that was done for this traffic modeling included 375, Montwood, Zaragoza area,
Right.
and that's what TxDOT is looking at. They are looking at that entire interchange, entire area, to try to come up with a plan to make that flow better. And yes, this has been included in the accommodation for that area. I don't know. Let TxDOT Eduardo Calvo address that a little bit more, but.
Thank you. Eduardo Calvo with TxDOT here in El Paso. We've looked at that intersection, at that particular quarter. It's not only the Joe Battle Zaragoza, but it includes Montwood as well.
Right.
And as we all know, it's a very complicated intersection. Part of the design or several options that we looked at included extending ramps and building ramps that would go from Zaragoza to Zaragoza.
Right.
There's so many right-of-way restrictions on that, on the Zaragoza, on the opposite
And that's what I
side
was
of-
thinking, that
Exactly.
you're
We've looked at
solving
it.
a certain problem, but you may yet have another problem on
Right.
top.
And, of course, from an engineering perspective, we can do anything, but the right-of-way, complications of cost and all that would be, it's extremely high. That's why when the CMP was conceived, we all agreed that this was one of the most sensible approaches to try to feed all the traffic coming down from Zaragoza to Joe Battle south and in the opposite direction to improve the operation of the intersection. But yes, to answer your question, we have looked at many other options and that are still implementable in the future that would complement this project. But again, they're very complicated in terms of right-of-way and cost.
And I was thinking exactly about Zaragoza because it kind of breaks there. It's not exactly lined up. I'm not sure. I didn't pay attention to the map, but I remember it's not quite lined up. Because Zaragoza at some point is kind of north-south, and then there it turns kind of northeast. I guess northeast, I'm not sure.
Zaragoza corridor is a major challenge because it's not only creating complications on that intersection with Joe Battle, but also down on I-10. That's another very complicated intersection when it comes, diagonally meeting with George Dieter onto I-10. Those two intersections are, headaches.
Okay.
Going forward, Mr. Calvo, everything's heading south now. Do you ever envision going from Zaragoza north onto Joe Battle?
With direct connectors, we haven't really seen that movement as being, a priority. However, in the future, I mean that area is going to be growing so much, and it's going to be generating a lot of traffic. But there's other arterials that allow for trips generating from that triangle between Zaragoza, Joe Battle, and Montana. Other arterials that can allow traffic to get to Joe Battle.
I think there's a fairly direct route onto 375 north, really. It's quick access, almost like a small access road, if I'm not correct. So if I'm not mistaken.
Well, it's a fairly large arterial, Pebble Hills, but that's a city arterial. Well, it's right on the border in the city limits. That project also has some issues, but once the city or the county or both are able to connect Pebble Hills to Zaragoza, that will allow another very good connection to Loop 375.
What about the population projection, Eduardo? What are you expecting there?
Well, all the population projections were developed by the MPO. So all the work that you see, and including the simulation that Mr. Rudd just presented, the starting point really is the MPO forecast for the region. So it's not only how the region is going to grow as the regional totals overall, but how the population is going to be distributed within the region. So basically, the MPO does most of that work, and from that population distribution is how we develop all our traffic projections.
So you just took that population data and plugged it into the model, and you just left it as they project it to be. And how often does the MPO update its projections on the population
Every
growth?
time the MPO develops a new plan or a metropolitan transportation plan update, they always look back at the demographics and they update them. It's not only population, households, but employment and other factors.
And in your estimation, do they always go above reality, below, at? Where do they fall, more or less? Given experience, I'm not asking you to project the future, just to look at the past.
Well, forecasting is
especially the future is a
it's all the procedures that we have right now, in absence of a crystal ball. There is a lot of science that goes into this. I think the forecast in general terms are pretty good. They give us a pretty good estimate. We're forecasting at least 20 years ahead of time. The target year right now is 2035. So I think overall the MPO has done a very good job in forecasting. But again, it's a forecast.
Right. Thanks.
Rand?
Okay, so back to the PowerPoint then. Just a couple more slides. So this is the proposed funding approach, and actually I was corrected. The $32 million is the total project funds that have been identified for the project. However, I had forgotten to correct these numbers in relation to the aesthetic project. As you'll recall, when we were discussing that, I mentioned that the $10 million for the aesthetic project is coming straight from Category 2 funds from TxDOT. Originally, you may recall when we first started talking about that project, originally it was $5 million from Category 2 and $5 million from the pass-through. Well, when the city of El Paso abolished its original TRZ number 1 and then established TRZs number 2 and number 3, they no longer ran along I-10, which meant that we could no longer use TRZ revenue for the aesthetic project, which made us shuffle funding around between this project and the aesthetic project. So what you see before you, the $32 million is still correct. However, the $17 million in pass-through is actually $12 million, and the $15 million in transportation reinvestment zone financing is actually $20 million. So I apologize for that. I'll correct this and add this PowerPoint to the website this afternoon. So again, $32 million is still correct. $12 million in pass-through financing and $20 million in transportation reinvestment zone financing is the current proposed financing plan for this project. As mentioned earlier also, the RMA is looking to pursue the pass-through and transportation reinvestment zone financing through the approach utilized for the Americas interchange, which essentially means that in terms of the pass-through financing, we'll structure it similar to what we have done for the Americas, and similarly with the reinvestment zone, we will be looking to go to the State Infrastructure Bank for a loan to be repaid through the transportation reinvestment zone generated income, as we've done with the Americas project.
Can we close this in 6 weeks so we can get another 35% interest subsidy, Mr.
I wish. That would have been ideal.
Is that a no?
Well, the next slide shows you, or actually in a couple of slides we'll talk about timelines. As we mentioned, per the 2008 Comprehensive Mobility Plan, TxDOT has agreed to provide the final approved schematic design, which, as mentioned, results in about 30% of the final design. They also agreed to provide the environmental approval and also the right-of-way acquisition. And these three items were agreed to by TxDOT to be provided for not only the Zaragoza direct connectors, but the Americas interchange project, as well as the Northeast main lanes.
I heard about 30 days ago that the environmental approval was any day, so do you know if the environmental is approved?
It has been approved.
Excellent.
The schematic was approved in October of 2010. The environmental document was approved in October of 2010 as well, and the right-of-way acquisition is in progress by TxDOT. This all means, and the real question is, when does this project get turned over to the RMA so we can begin evaluating it and begin answering the questions, for example, by what procurement process will we use? Will this be a design build? Will it be a design bid build? All of those questions get answered once the project is turned over to us, and that we are looking for that to happen sometime in the first quarter of 2011, which means then that the procurement and the design of the project could actually begin in the second quarter of next year. All of this, though, of course, is contingent upon the project being turned over to us, which, as you see, until TxDOT either acquires a right-of-way or if the RMA agrees to do something a little differently with TxDOT, we would wait for the right-of-way acquisition to be completed. And I mention that because, as you'll recall, with the Americas interchange project, we actually took the project over before the right-of-way was totally acquired. In fact, if they're not done, they're pretty close. So it shows that we can pursue a project even when the right-of-way is not completely acquired. But the initial plan for this project was to wait for acquisition to be complete. So we'll revisit that as TxDOT progresses. So with that, I'm open to any questions, as is Mr. Rudd and Mr. Calvo. Thank you for joining us from TxDOT as well. Any questions on this project?
Well, I just want to say that this is a good idea. I think that occasionally we ought to have this kind of update because I think it gives us a quick look at the different pieces and the different progress on these different pieces. And I just have a question. I didn't see anything about the Northeast Parkway except that it was just mentioned. But I think that, Mr. Chairman, ought to be something that we should be discussing. I think the Northeast Parkway should be moved up in the priority.
The Northeast main lines, or?
Well, you know, that project number 15.
Dyer to 54?
Yeah, well, number 15, that first section, I think number 15 is the first phase, right?
Right. What you're referring to is actually the Northeast Parkway project, which is a potential toll project. And through the Comprehensive Mobility Plan, that project is identified as just beyond the feasibility review to make sure that it makes sense. If it does, then the RMA would be tasked with acquiring right-of-way for that project.
Right. And I think, I haven't talked to Raymond yet about the December board meeting, but I think we may be looking at the Northeast Mainlines project, which is an $80 million project to connect the loop with 2 direct lanes to US 54. So, and Raymond had an interesting idea. These projects are roughly fairly close in terms of timeline. They're relatively close in terms of right-of-way, environmental, and potentially we could look at bundling these projects and putting out a larger project that is $112 million. So there's a lot of different options we have and we can discuss. But since we're running a little long today, we'll kind of move on. Item 9, discussion and action on the Executive Director's Report, Team Texas Meeting, San Antonio, and the 2010 Border-to-Border Transportation Conference.
I just wanted to touch base with you. As I mentioned at the last board meeting, I was getting ready to attend the Team Texas meeting for October. I spoke actually at a couple of these sessions, including one that dealt specifically with our experience with the design-build process for the Americas interchange. I thought that was a good exchange. The developer, actually, the Zachary Group, was there on the panel as well, so I think it was a good exchange. Beyond that, the legislative committee meeting met, which I am a committee vice chair. And we met to discuss the latest legislative, predictions, and that was, I thought, very interesting. Beyond that, I've included the agenda. If you had any questions, feel free to give me a call on those so we can, so I can answer any of those for you. It was, as usual, it was a good meeting of all of the potential toll organizations throughout the state, and I think there was a lot of good participation from the audience. So that was just a brief update. Beyond that, item 9B, which is the 2010 Border-to-Border Transportation Conference, I wanted to mention this. This is a conference that is actually being put together by the El Paso Metropolitan Planning Organization in coordination with the Hidalgo County Metropolitan Planning Organization down in South Texas. The last coordination transportation committee, or rather transportation meeting that they had was down in McAllen a couple of years ago, and this one is being held next week here in El Paso. I've attached the agenda for you, and you'll see there's a lot of really good presentations being held with some really good speakers. So if you're interested, please stop me after the meeting, and we can talk about getting you enrolled to attend any of these. I will attend the majority of these, actually, and also I'll be speaking at one of the last ones, the roundtable discussion on Thursday. So this is a really good transportation conference that a local organization is helping to put on, and it's going to bring a lot of transportation officials to the region, so I thought you all should be aware of that. And again, if you're interested in attending any of the sessions, please let me know.
Yeah, I probably will attend some of them.
Absolutely. So subject to your questions, that's all that I have for you today.
Mr. Chairman, I have one question. Last time we met, we tabled the third amendment for J.D. Abrams for the spur. Can you give us an update on what was current on that?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, we tabled it because we had to send it back. There were some issues with some of the language that was being proposed, and that language has not yet been resolved. And we talked a little bit about the issue, but ultimately the negotiation is still ongoing. So I didn't bring it back. And actually, the last action of the board was to delete the item rather than to postpone it. So since it was deleted, I didn't have to post it this month. I'm hopeful, and actually I believe that I should have it for you in December.
For our next meeting?
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to point out on the border-to-border transportation conference, if nothing else, if those of us that are members of this board attend the 9:30 session with Amadeo Saenz, he's probably going to bring everybody up to date on all the issues that are current in TxDOT, and they're issues that we don't deal with here. We're dealing with building new assets, and he'll probably bring up the problems and issues over the next 20 or 30 years we're going to face in maintaining those assets, and I think it's important we all be aware of that. Mm-hmm. I'm on the 2030 committee in Austin, and we work with Mr. Saenz and TxDOT on coming up with a plan for the future for maintaining those assets. So,
You have a good point. And I would encourage all the board members. There is a fee for us to go, but I encourage us to go. So let Mr. Tejas know. I intend to go to a number of the different sessions and just kind of see what's happening in certain areas. So,
Same way.
Any other questions? If not, is there a motion to
Move to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? We are adjourned at approximately 10:35 Wednesday, November 10th.
Nobody's
Meeting.
ever can abstain or oppose that.
Good meeting.